Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and today we will be talking about The Kin Enigma by Darrel Miller, which was one of the books suggested to us by our supporters on Patreon.
But before we get into that, our quick 5-minute introduction. What's something great that happened recently?
I made a really good curry last night for dinner.
Ooh, what style?
It was a Thai curry,
Yum.
coconut curry.
Mail it to me.
I'll send you the recipe. It's really easy.
Nice, yeah, that sounds great.
Like, you do need a number of spices, but they were all things that I had in my spice drawer. And besides that, it was pretty simple.
My good thing is also food related. I got breakfast in bed this morning.
Nice.
It was very nice. I felt very fancy. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking some hot chocolate because it is wet and rainy out.
It's actually sunny here, but it's cold, so I feel the vibe. This to me is a coffee book, and I can't really explain... Well, I can explain why, although I don't think it's on the page. But both, scientists delving into a study and, some kind of... I don't know, the late night study group meeting of the minds is very coffee energy to me.
I get that. It's definitely not a hot chocolate book, except that it's cold outside right now. Though I could make the argument that because it takes place in, the forest, when I go backpacking with my father, I drink hot chocolate. And so that reminds me of backpacking with my father.
Yeah, in the Sierra Nevadas, too. Yeah. So you're actually quite familiar with where this book takes place.
Or the kind of area. I backpack much farther south.
Yeah, it's the same mountain range. It's fine. Also, the mercenaries, and we'll go into what these factions mean in a second. But there's also quite a bit of mercenaries, being rough and tumble in the environment. And that also is a very coffee vibe to me, although in a different way. All of that is to say, I finished my coffee before we started recording. So I'm actually drinking tea. But I was drinking coffee while I read the book, and that was quite fitting.
I think that's appropriate.
Have you read anything good lately? We have been recording on a marathon, so my answer's no.
I've read some good fanfic, but in terms of published work that I have paid for, that is for sale, no.
I mean, fanfic counts.
Fanfic counts, yeah.
I guess along those lines, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction about babies. All right, The Kin Enigma. This is definitely a science fiction book, emphasis on the science.
There's a lot of science, and it's very clear that Miller knows his science. Unfortunately, my eyes did glaze over just a little bit when some of the science things were being described, because there's a lot of science, and I don't have a science degree.
Yeah, I'm torn between it wasn't for me. I just didn't understand it. But I did like that aspect of the book because
I liked how authentic it felt.
Yeah.
It felt like the science was real, and I think that they were doing real science. I don't know. I mean, werewolves are not a thing. So their conclusions are and their subject matter is not real, but it really did add that layer of authenticity to the story, which I did quite like, even if, it was sometimes a little much for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I bet there is a reader out there, because it's not like it was described in a totally opaque way. I mean, most of the time, if there was a conversation around what the very specific blood cells were doing, it was then explained in a more conversational tone. So it was accessible. I just personally didn't need all of it. I liked that it was there, and then some of it could have been implied. But I think there's probably a different reader who would have loved having all of it there.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded it being used a little bit more moderately.
Yeah.
But I liked that it was there.
Mm-hmm. So this book is, I would say, primarily about a group of scientists who are working with a man who he's not exactly a werewolf. That's the, pop culture comparison, but he's a werewolf. The kin are werewolves, and they're studying him, but there's also conflict around that because some people don't want this to happen and some people have their own ulterior motives. So there's also a lot of that's the mercenary aspect that we were talking about, right? There's the security force and some other things going along around the edges.
And it's not that he's being studied by some shadowy government and he's trying to get away. Like, he is an active participant in this, just to be clear.
He organized the study, which I thought, so I agreed when that first came up, because we're introduced in this book of the scientists kind of coming together and forming this team and talking about their subject. And I was like, ooh, human experimentation. It's a little uncomfortable.
I was a little worried, but I really liked that he was the one who had organized it, because he is trying to, or his faction of the kin are trying to figure out a way to reveal themselves to, like, the rest of the world.
Which absolutely changes the tone of that situation, right? It suddenly is not human experimentation anymore. Now it's collaborative learning about yourself and working towards his goals.
It's not nefarious.
Right. And because of that, I mean, the science crew and then the sort of cascading events around that, it felt so much like Michael Crichton to me. Granted, I've only read one book, and it was Sphere, and I wasn't a huge fan. But like the way that you had the scientists and they were studying an anomaly and they're in this remote location and things start kind of going wrong around them, it reminded me so much of Crichton.
I can see the comparison. I'm not sure I would have come there on my own. I don't disagree with you now that you've explained it. I liked the Kin Enigma much better than I liked Sphere. I hated Sphere.
I also agree. So I think Sphere had better pacing, but I liked the characters in Kin Enigma so much more.
Yes, I agree with that.
Which made it actually enjoyable to read. So I use the Sphere comparison to say if you liked Sphere or Crichton, this could probably be a book for you.
It's that same kind of heavy science vibe.
Yeah. Oh, there's also a lot of historical references in this book. I only spot-checked one of them. The Escobar Rebellion in 1929 does indeed line up with the details given in this book. So I assume they're all true. I didn't sit there and look up every single one. But
well, and Miller includes an appendix at the end of all of the things that he researched that he thought were interesting.
Oh, so I did start looking through that and got, about 3 chapters worth of I guess they're not footnotes because they're not footnoted from the text.
Yeah, they're not footnotes. Yeah. They're just notes.
Yeah. But I didn't get far enough to get to the the other things. But that also, I think, makes it very anchored and concrete in a way.
It felt like a really well-researched novel that could actually take place today.
Absolutely. Oh, speaking of today, when do you think this took place?
That's a good question.
I was trying to, because there's not like a year given at any point, I don't think. And the characters have cell phones.
It's kind of nebulous modern day, which I think makes it a longer lasting book, right? Because it's not specifically tied to any one date. I think you could read it today. I think you could have read it in 2018 and still felt like it was the present day.
I was thinking even earlier than that.
I mean, yes, but that's my point. Like, I think
they don't mention iPod shuffles or anything. Yeah, right? There's nothing that specifies. It's the only reason why I ask is because the characters bring up references and are referencing events that made me think that they were, well, today I would say they are older, which makes me think that this was maybe more like 90s.
I wouldn't necessarily have said 90s. Yeah, I would have said some kind of nebulous contemporary time. I did have some occasional issues with the prose. Like, for the most part, I thought it was okay. It veered a little bit towards the purple at times, but not as much as that first page had me worried about. The first page, the first page was a little purple, but it evened out after that. But there would be like a scene that was going on, and I'd be really invested in what was happening, and then like Miller would kind of stop abruptly and summarize the rest of the events, and I wanted the scene to continue on. Like, I wanted to learn about what was going on naturally rather than get that kind of abrupt summary.
Yeah, it felt very inconsistent, which I think kind of loops back to the pacing that I was referencing, because it felt like the story really hit its stride during the action sequences. We got some background scenes of the mercenaries doing, mercenary things. I don't want to spoil too much. Off in the jungle before the events of this book. And you could really tell that the author was into those moments and, taking his time to explore those and really detail them and walk you through everything that's going on. And then you would get to a scene that's supposed to be the background for one of the doctors, and it was just kind of like their resume.
It did feel like some of the more expository scenes got truncated. Like, you'd get a little bit of that exposition, and then you'd get the Spark Notes version.
Yeah. Which is funny because there is so much of the science in here, but that was clearly like not the fun part for I don't know. It was just interesting. That mix of here's some very like thoughtful science, and then we're going to talk about guns and explosions for a minute. I really loved the different plot lines that were happening in this book, and I quite liked bouncing around between them. That kept it moving faster. The beginning starts with what I'm going to call the historical kin plotline, which is where we get glimpses of how the kin, or werewolves, have sort of interacted with human society across millennia. It starts in the Ice Age. And we eventually move forward in time. I would have liked that, I think, a little bit, honestly, more. I wanted more of the historical kin. That was one of my favorite parts.
I wanted more of them too. Yeah, I 100% agree.
So more of those scenes, and then I wanted like a more gradual increase, because it kind of jumps from the Ice Age to the Crusades. And I think it would have been cool to kind of have a more gradual. This kind of just goes back to I wanted more of it.
Yeah, I think this is just we wanted more of the historical plotline.
I also think it would have been neat if some of the plot lines had been interwoven differently. As it is in the novel, they're kind of all prose, right? It's the story is just jumping around, following different people during different time periods. But I think if they had been included with like, here's a news article about a conflict in Colombia around a drug deal, instead of actually showing us that scene, or here's an excerpt of the like scientific journal that one of the scientists is working on during their study, instead of here's a conversation between two scientists where they tell you and explain all of the science jargon. I think that would have kept it a little more varied. And then also, personally, that would have helped me, because I don't know if you experienced this, but we're jumping around from some very like logical, considered, almost objective prose, and then, a page later, we are in the head of a mercenary who, in some cases, ends up being an antagonist at the end. And you're suddenly like, oh, whoa, this person's very racist. Which is fine for the character. But when you go from the prose is very like thoughtful and considered, it took me a second to go, is the prose telling me that this is supposed to be like taken the same way? Because yikes.
I did have that same trouble. some of the perspective changes were a little jarring. And I agree that we didn't necessarily need to see everything in the prose. Like some of the background details, like, you know, this drug deal in Colombia, I think would have been just as effective hearing about it as seeing it. And yeah, you know, articles or whatever interspersed would have kept it more varied, would have broken it up a little bit, and maybe sped up the pacing just a little bit.
It also would have helped me with those perspective shifts, I think. It would have signaled that, like, hey, this is a different character now. Or some, you know, I would have been expecting it more and I wouldn't have had to take that moment to catch up.
Yeah.
Something that this novel does really well is it explores kind of the implications of werewolves, or kin, as they're called in the book, from just about every different sociological angle that you can think of. There is no stone left unturned.
Yeah, I really enjoyed how thoughtful that aspect was. Like obviously we get the scientific angle, how are the kin just physically different from Homo sapiens? And there's a lot of time spent on that. That's because that's what the scientists are studying in this book. But we also get a little bit of discussion of, you know, are werewolves people from a Catholic perspective? And some of the religious characters struggle with the revelation that the kin, you know, exist.
But some of the religious characters are very gung ho about it and are like, this is proof that God is real. So
Yeah.
I loved that you got both very different reactions, just from a like humanity perspective, the variety of human experience, right? You see all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it made sense that you would get a bunch of different perspectives and that people would come to it from the same starting point but end up in different, you know, in different places. And I did really like that.
It does also get mentioned. I was wondering if this would be addressed in the text of the book itself, because the kin are visually different from humans. I mean, not to the extent that you would think that's a different species, but they are shorter and darker of skin. And I wondered if Miller was going to address like the racism aspect, because you can't really ignore that, right? If you have a whole group of people that have darker skin and are being treated differently, like you have to reference that at least a little bit, right?
Yeah. And it does come up a little bit. Honestly, I would have liked it to be addressed more. I don't necessarily think that it was addressed enough, but it does come up a little bit.
It's at least acknowledged, which
Yeah.
I needed.
Yes.
I was surprised with how far through the book. It was one of the flashbacks actually to the kin in Alabama, maybe 100 years or so before the events of this book. And I was like, okay, someone said it. Thank goodness.
But it does take a while to get there.
Yes. There's also, of course, the economic perspective. Some people want to exploit the kin and benefit from that, which, you know, there would absolutely be a human being doing that if this came up.
Absolutely. And we don't see a ton of it, but Esprit does wonder, Esprit being the kin who is being studied, he does wonder, like, whether or not the kin will be sought after for their blood and the various properties that that their blood contains, because they can, you know, their blood can be used for healing diseases or whatever, if that's eventually a thing. They're not sure it will be, but you know, he does wonder about what that means for them.
Yeah. If they are resistant to disease and the scientists are finding the exact mechanism in their blood that causes that, does that mean they're going to be, you know, hunted down and farmed for it?
Yeah.
Which does bring us to the kin themselves have different sides, right? Esprit wants to undergo this study in order to help reveal the kin to society at large, but not everyone agrees with that. And I really also liked sort of having those two sides. There's two sides to everything in this book. Like there is no one, like, this character has the one true opinion on this thing. Even all the way down to the mercenaries, who for the most part are not actually that invested at all and are really just here coincidentally, but still end up being very influential on the outcome of this story, which is so, I'm going to say genuine. It's always the factors outside of your control that end up really affecting events, right?
Yeah.
It would be great if the only people who affected things were people really invested in it.
It's not how life works.
No, sometimes it's a coincidence, which is not comforting of a thought, but very realistic, which I think helped, again, keep this story just feeling like this is absolutely how it would play out if this was a thing that happened.
I mean, it felt really grounded. Like it didn't, yes, it's a science fiction novel, but it felt like it could take place in the real world.
Yeah. It's not space magic sci-fi.
It's not space magic sci-fi. Definitely not.
Well, we've danced around the mercenaries quite a bit, and I think that will be a much fuller conversation once we get into the spoilers section. So first, Sarah, who should read this book?
I think you should read this book if you do really enjoy Crichton, if you want a very science-based, like grounded science fiction novel, and also if you like werewolves, but you want a different view of them, because these are not your traditional werewolves. This is not your traditional werewolf story.
No, not at all. Which is a really fun angle to take. So yeah, if you like werewolves and are ready for something different, if you're looking for the classic werewolf, this is not that.
Right. This episode of Fiction Fans is brought to you by Solsticia.
That's our zine. Each issue has a different theme that celebrates genre and genre blending in a new way.
PDF and EPUB versions can be purchased on our website, and Patreon supporters of all levels get free digital copies.
You can find all of the issues and more at patreon.com/fictionfanspod. Thank you for your support.
The remainder of this episode contains spoilers. Okay, talking about the mercenaries. Now, this would not have solved all of the conflict in the book. There would still have been conflict. But I did wonder why Mac, who was the lead scientist, he was the director of what was going on, or Sirocco, who was the legal consultant, like, why did they not do better due diligence on their security force? I get that, like, Caustic, who was the mercenary in charge of security, mostly hired like good people, but Caustic was only there. Caustic was a bad dude. He was only there because he was on the run from drug lords in Colombia because a drug deal that he was overseeing had gone wrong. Why did they not know that?
Well, I don't think that would come up on a classic background check.
Yeah, but surely they did some kind of background check on him to see that he was, like, dishonorably discharged and all of that.
I suspect, well, the book didn't go into this, which maybe if it had taken a moment, we wouldn't be talking about it. But I suspect that's an issue with the secrecy, right? When you are being so locked down, was it a deception flourishes in shadow or something? There's some quote, I'm sure I butchered it. But because they were trying to keep things so under wraps, they had to go with the shady mercenary instead of a reasonable, like, security company that would have maybe asked questions.
Maybe. I mean, I needed a little bit of an explanation. Like, for Trevor, who was a big name scientist who was kind of dismissed from his previous post because he's sexually harassing his female students. Like, they at least acknowledge that Mac wasn't paying attention and so didn't know about that charge.
Yeah.
And so I could overlook that, but I needed something for Caustic.
I mean, it would have solved a lot of problems.
It would have solved some problems. It wouldn't have solved all of the problems in the book.
I think the other thing too is Caustic starts out on their side. They're his employer and he's doing the right thing. A right thing is maybe dramatic, but he is, honoring that employment.
He's not double-crossing them initially.
No, and he doesn't go into it intending to double-cross them. But because he is kind of a shady guy, there are aspects of his past that are exploitable, and so he ends up being a weak link and flipped on that front. What bothered me in that kind of plot arc was that several doctors have really uncomfortable run-ins with the security team, and none of them talk to each other about it or report it to Mac.
No, Mac does say that he'd gotten reports of several of the doctors having bad issues with Maxim, I think, was one of the guards, and some of the other guards, but he just doesn't, like, his response is to talk to Caustic, and so nothing happens there.
Yeah, and then Caustic's response is to bring in more shady dudes.
Yeah, like, I do think that they, at some point, they needed better oversight of what was going on there.
Yeah. I am happy to blame that on scientists having tunnel vision, and just Mac is a scientist and not a manager.
It's possible, but, like, he made the very smart decision to bring in an expert on isolation, Chris. He could have brought in HR. He could have hired someone for HR. Like,
and that's why he's not a good manager.
if you're going to be isolating for a year, you probably do want someone who can help you handle any interpersonal conflicts that come up.
Yeah. Now, something that needs to be said is that for all of the names in this book, every time someone got brought up, I did generally know which side they were on, which is kind of incredible because I am historically not a fan of 10,000 characters in a novel.
You do tend to have some issues with lots of names. But yeah, I feel like all of the characters in this were pretty distinct, and it was easy to keep track of who was who.
And I didn't necessarily remember, like, the backstory that was connected with every single character. But I was like, oh, T-Bone, that's one of Caustic's guys. Great. Which is incredible. Just, like, for me as a reader, I'm not usually that good with names. You brought up Chris earlier. She is, I would say, one of the main scientists. There aren't a ton of scientists, but I would still say that some of them get more page time, main character energy than others.
She definitely has more main character energy than some of the other scientists, even if this is, by and large, a mostly ensemble cast.
But out of the ensemble cast, she is one of the major scientist characters. Maybe
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yes.
Because not all of the scientists are major, despite their small number. But she is the psychologist that is brought along, and originally intended to make sure no one breaks from being isolated for a year during this project. But she ends up working with Esprit, our main character, the Kin, who has started this whole study. And they end up bonding and actually start a relationship through the book, which I won't say that the relationship came out of nowhere. I think it was actually telegraphed pretty well, but it felt like it escalated quickly in the back half of the book.
It felt kind of abrupt for me. Like, I could see that it was coming, but I wanted more build-up, both before they, like, acknowledged their feelings for each other, and then afterwards, like you said, in the back half of the book when things escalate. I just wanted a little bit more time spent on the development of their relationship.
Yeah, and well, this is probably my biases as a romantic book reader, but their physical relationship escalates. They sleep together. That was fine. I was like, yeah, you're isolated, you found someone you connect with, they have sex. Fine. But then the morning after, they immediately start exchanging I love yous, and that's where I was like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, like,
you guys have known each other for like maybe 6 months.
it felt a little abrupt.
Yeah. I just wanted to clarify, it was the emotional aspect that felt abrupt. Versus like two adults sleeping together when you have not a lot of options, that's fine.
Yes. Yes.
But then afterwards, it felt like their relationship was managed quite well while it's happening sort of in the background of the plot, because it's not really the focus of this story. Although, as Esprit does say, the point of this is to see how kin and others, or Homo sapiens, can interact. So ending up in a relationship with a human is a great outcome, which I thought was very funny.
That was a good line. I did like that.
But it's still not really the main point of the novel. And so you continue to get like bits and pieces of their closeness, of their intimacy, while there are some very dramatic action scenes in the last like quarter. And I thought that was like, it kept reminding you, like, also, by the way, they've fallen in love, without either forgetting it or giving it too much spotlight when that clearly wasn't the point.
Yeah, I thought it was done well. Again, I would have liked a little bit more development. I think it would have benefited from a little bit more spotlight, but for the most part, I thought it was good.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is I wanted more leading up to it, but once like they sort of had their on-page scene, the rest of the novel saying, I didn't forget about them, but also they're not the point, was like the perfect level, I thought,
Yeah.
of attention.
Yeah.
They're not the only relationship that we see on the page. We also follow the family, which is the antagonistic group of kin that want to stay secret during the events of this, or, I mean, yeah, during the events of this novel, but period. So they're trying to stop the study. They end up besieging the isolated scientific compound. But before then, as we're sort of learning about them, we learn that they are kind of a, what would you say? Polyamory doesn't even feel like quite the right word. Free love.
Yeah, I don't think poly is the right description of them, but
they're not monogamous within that like small cultural subset.
Yeah.
And when that's first brought up, I was like, oh, neat. We're seeing a different, societal structure. And then when we actually see that in practice, we get Magnus, the head of this group, absolutely coercing women into sleeping with him. And I was like, no!
He is incredibly manipulative.
It was awful. Which, I mean, he's the bad guy, so yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's not healthy relationships that he's fostering, which is fine because he's the bad guy, but it was a little unfortunate too.
It made that cultural subset, instead of like, oh, neat, a different society structure, it was, oh no, this is just a cult leader exploiting the people who follow him. Okay.
Yeah.
But then at the very end, we see some of the people from his faction who have kind of deflected. We get a relationship between three of the people who had originally been on his side, realize that he is the absolute worst and leave. And they do seem to be genuinely polyamorous in a way that I would not call Magnus and his relationships.
Yeah. And I wish we had more of them. I mean, I would have liked to spend more time with the family in general. I think not Magnus specifically, but with some of the other kin in that group, just to get maybe a more balanced view of like that group of characters. Because the defection of Spider and Farah at the end isn't sudden. Like, it's coming. Magnus tried to kill Spider or have Spider killed. Like, you're not surprised that he then realized
Spider holds a grudge. Yeah.
But I would have liked to see a little bit more just of that build up too.
I really loved Spider's plotline and would have liked to see maybe not more of him necessarily, but I think this is just part of my like, I loved all of the different excerpts that we got and wished that it was more like more.
Yeah.
Less action scenes, more, well, this is just me in a nutshell as a reader. Less action scenes, more character development.
I just would have liked to see more, I think more of the characters around Spider, like more Farah, more Cece, just so that it felt a little bit more balanced.
Which is interesting because we don't see any of Esprit's group of kin. I mean, we see Esprit, and there's a very short scene at the beginning. Two of his buddies come to help, but that's about it. So really the family and that whole situation, I'm gonna say, it's not a good situation, just because Magnus is the worst, is like the most modern kin that we see in the book. So I'd say we actually need more, either more of the historical kin, that's just me wanting more of the historical kin, or more of like what's happening with the people that Esprit left behind. We don't know anything about them.
Oh, see, I'm not viewing it as balanced in terms of getting more of the kin necessarily, because you're right, we don't see much of like Esprit's faction. I think that's taken up by the scientists, basically.
Yeah.
Like they get that
His
page
faction,
time.
he's part of the scientist crew. Yeah, I agree.
But just in terms of showing we get a lot of time in the science faction and in Esprit's faction of seeing the different perspectives of like the scientists and everyone who is working in that compound. And so you do really get to see that they are not a monolith and that they all have their different motivations for being in there. And you get that a little bit with Magnus's group, but I would have liked to get more of that. That's what I mean by balance.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed Spider quite a bit, so I was content, but you're right. You bring up, though, a great point. We've talked about the different factions, the scientists who are trying to study the kin so that they may reveal themselves to humanity, Magnus and the family who are kin that want to stay secret and therefore stop this study and murder everybody. There are the mercenaries who are originally hired to protect the scientists and end up double-crossing them due to money and various manipulations from Magnus. And then there's a group of mercenaries that show up and end up helping the scientists. Basically, I would say that's like, yeah, the four major factions that end up in the final conflict.
I would agree.
Not a single one of them is like of one mind. They're all very complex, which I really, really loved, especially considering how thoughtful this book is in other ways around like the implications of other species, humanoid species. And so having that, I'm going to say humanity, and how humans are messy and have other, so many different motivations and opinions going on. Any group of more than 4 people, there is someone who disagrees with the group that they're with. And I thought that was so well done and really added another layer of complexity to this story.
You do get that messiness of just humanity. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm including the kin in that. But, even on the scientist side, you have Trevor, the doctor who wants to cash in on this discovery.
I mean, he's a jerk.
He's he's an antagonist, even though he's on the scientist's team, and tries to betray them, although it doesn't totally work out for him. Just like in the family on Magnus's faction of the kin, he's not a good leader in that, he's selfish and cruel. So of course he ends up alienating people on his side, and they end up leaving. That was probably my favorite moment in the book. And then they came back and helped the scientists just because they were like, this is kind of shitty.
I did really like them.
That's really nice. They have no reason. I mean, I could see them feeling partially responsible, but it's clearly Magnus's fault. Well, I mean, by leaving and deflecting from Magnus's side, they are helping the scientists.
I mean, Spider goes back because he wants revenge on Magnus and also to find Farah and Cece. And then they're just kind of like, they happen upon some of the scientists fighting some of the other kin and are like, okay, we're gonna protect you because these guys are now our enemy. And then they peace out.
Yeah, but they could have peaced out immediately is what I'm saying. And they get hurt in that fight. Like, that was unnecessary. The book doesn't spend a lot of time on this, but I think there is a little tiny germ of the inherent goodness in people. When someone with no reason to get involved stumbles across an obvious injustice, they do step in, which was nice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Caustic and his mercenaries, who have no reason to support anyone except for money and personal interests. Except a couple of his mercenaries are like, this is fucked up. And they do end up helping the scientists and the scientist mercenaries.
Well, I don't think that JJ and Andrea were mercenaries. They were hired by Caustic as part of the security force.
They're fighting for money. That's a mercenary. I'm being very simplistic, but that's
Oh, okay. I mean, but I do think it's worth differentiating because they were not like Caustic's band of mercenaries, separate from the people he hires as security guards. Like
right.
they are really bad dudes fighting for money, whereas security guards are basically there to provide security and just like get their paycheck. I do think there's a difference.
There is, yes. I thought JJ did also have a history, though, because he kind of goes Rambo a little bit. And I don't think a regular security guard would just do that.
They do talk a little bit about JJ's history, and he's not Caustic level.
Well, sure, yeah.
like he has a troubled past, but I wouldn't call him a mercenary.
The other group of mercenaries were led by Drake, and I remember him and them being introduced earlier in the book. I cannot for the life of me remember why they show up and get involved.
It's because Friend is the one who originally provides this, like he was the one who hired Caustic to be head of security or something, and he's like, I haven't heard anything from this place. Would you go and check on it since you're going to Seattle anyway? And so Drake does him a favor.
Okay. I did remember that, like, he was asked to go check it out, but I didn't remember that it was from the person who had originally hired Caustic.
I believe that it's from the person who had originally hired Caustic. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
In that final conflict, when kind of everything has gone to shit, it's just a full-on firefight for days between various factions of kin and scientists and mercenaries, and Drake and his team show up, and I'm like, I'm so glad you're here. Why? But I remembered who he was. Like, I remembered his introductory scene and like the character background we got, and even, like I said, I'm not his followers, but the other people on his faction. Like, I remembered Booker and how he was a great sniper and everything. So clearly the characters stuck in my mind. It was just maybe a little convenient that they showed up when they did.
Convenient, yes, but there is an explanation of they've been specifically asked to go check up on the compound, so I didn't mind that the timing was good. That's just plot.
Yeah, no, and they don't come out of left field. Like, we see them kind of making their way towards Weed, California, which also, funniest location.
I'm sure that has something to do with why the story is set there.
And it was fun, like, having just driven down to you in the Bay Area. Like, we did drive through Weed to get there. That is also the only reason you go to Weed, is to drive between Northern California and Seattle. And it has a gorgeous view of Mount Shasta. So, like, that is nice. But being kind of familiar with the area, and, you know, they're talking about Redding and how that, anyway, it was just especially fun. This is like the second Bay Area book we've read. Is Weed Bay Area Northern California book?
Weed is not Bay Area.
No, I rescinded that statement. I just associate it because you only go there when you're driving through to get to the Bay Area.
Yeah. But we have done a lot of Northern California stories. And by that I mean like 2.
Of wildly different genres.
Wildly different genres. Very, very different stories. But it's fun to read books that are set in a place you recognize.
It really is. It adds another layer of, I don't know, connection? I'm automatically more invested.
Yeah.
Which is maybe, I know that's probably human nature, to be more invested in a place that you know.
I think it's just human nature.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We're on Blue Sky and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com or leave a comment on YouTube.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
We also have a Patreon where you can support us and find exclusive episodes and a lot of other nonsense.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye!
Bye!